pulling his man through!
Protests are sweeping across Asia.
Gen Z protests erupting in pockets around the globe in recent months, from Madagascar to Nepal to Peru.
The rise of youth revolts. How Gen Z is rewriting history. Something unusual is happening around the world. Governments are falling. Streets are filled with teenagers and 20-somethings waving homemade signs and filming on their phones. They speak in memes, plan on Discord, and organize faster than authorities can react. Their message? Enough is enough. The spark that ignited the fire. Across continents, from Nepal to Madagascar, Gen Z is changing what protest looks like and what it can achieve. These aren't isolated uprisings. They're connected, contagious, and rewriting history in real time. In Nepal, everything started with one decision: a sudden social media ban. For a generation raised online, it felt like losing their voice overnight. Within hours, thousands of young people were in the streets. They streamed live on VPNs, shared protest videos, and used the same sarcastic humor that usually lives in comment sections. A sign seen during the protests read, "Corruption is sus. Stop ghosting democracy." It spread across TikTok and Twitter like wildfire. A slogan that sounded playful but carried real political weight. Meanwhile, in Madagascar, the trigger wasn't digital. It was physical. People were tired of government failures, of endless power cuts and water shortages. When promises of basic services never came, frustration turned into rage. The country's youth, with a median age of just 21, poured into the streets. Their goal was simple: accountability. Both nations share the same story underneath: young populations, deep unemployment, and governments disconnected from their citizens. The same pressure building up in one country seemed to echo in another, and the digital world amplified it all: the global thread. Reporter Hannah Beach from the New York Times spent time with Nepal's protesters. She explained how social media created a global bond among young people. Even if you're in a village, on a mountaintop, or in a desert, young people are connected on TikTok and Discord. They use the same language and share the same memes. That's what makes this generation different. Whether in Indonesia, Kenya, or Peru, Gen Z activists are not alone. They're watching each other, learning from each other. In Nepal, protesters said they were inspired by youth movements in Indonesia. In Madagascar, they drew strength from Nepal's success. The internet has erased borders between revolts. A TikTok video from Kathmandu might inspire a march in Antananarivo the next day, when the impossible happened. Then came the shocking part. The movements actually worked. In Nepal, a 2-day youth uprising, now called the 48-hour revolution, forced the government to step down. The young protesters had done what few thought possible. In Madagascar, the situation escalated further. After weeks of mass demonstrations, the president fled. The military stepped in, seizing control and promising a transition period. For a brief moment, it felt like victory. But as reporter John Elligon found on the ground, the story didn't end there. The young revolutionaries who risked their lives quickly realized they weren't the ones shaping the future. When an old opposition leader was selected to head the National Assembly, disappointment swept through the crowds. In Nepal, too, early optimism faded. The interim prime minister who had met with youth leaders soon stopped inviting them. The doors of government, once opened briefly, were shut again. The harsh reality of change. One young Nepali activist, who survived being shot during the protests, said something that captured the heartbreak many felt. What if everything goes back to the same way, even after we lost our blood and fallen comrades? What if all this was a waste? That fear isn't new. Analysts have drawn comparisons to two historical waves: the 1968 youth revolts in Western Europe and the Arab Spring of the 2010s. Both were driven by young people. Both brought down leaders. But neither solved the deeper issues they protested against. In today's movements, those same challenges are visible again. Abigail Branford, a researcher at Oxford University, put it clearly: issues like youth unemployment would be very difficult for states to address even if there was more effort to include young people in politics. The economy just can't absorb the number of young people entering the job market. So even when young protesters succeed in removing corrupt leaders, they often face the same broken systems and the same limited opportunities. Digital language, real power. Still, something remarkable is happening. The Gen Z revolts have created a shared global identity built entirely online. Protest slogans sound like viral tweets. Posters reference anime and gaming slang. A recurring anime-inspired symbol has appeared in rallies across different countries, serving as a mascot for youth resistance. It might seem playful, but it's strategic. Humor and creativity make it easier for messages to spread, and harder for regimes to suppress. Authorities can block websites, but they can't stop memes from being remade and reposted. What began as cultural connection has turned into political coordination. Young people are speaking to power in their own language, one that older politicians barely understand. Beyond Nepal and Madagascar, while Nepal and Madagascar became the most dramatic examples, the movement hasn't stopped there. In Morocco, youth-led demonstrations continue to grow. Kenya has seen university students organize protests through encrypted apps. In Peru and Indonesia, young activists cite the same frustrations: corruption, unemployment, and the feeling that no one in government represents them. This is what makes the current moment historic. It's not about one country's politics. It's about a generation that feels global before it feels national. The limits of revolution, but the reality is tough. As new governments take shape in both Nepal and Madagascar, many fear that history is repeating itself. Old politicians are back, promises of reform are slow, corruption investigations fade, the same structures remain in place. Experts warn that without real reform, these victories might be short-lived. But they also note that something deeper has shifted, a sense of possibility. Young people have learned that collective action works, even if imperfectly. As one activist in Antananarivo said, "We showed them we have power. Now we're learning that power doesn't mean control." Lessons from the past. The Gen Z uprisings echo a familiar cycle: hope, victory, and disappointment. But each generation that rises leaves a mark. The 1968 protests changed how youth were seen politically. The Arab Spring transformed how social media was used for activism. And now, the Gen Z revolts are teaching the world how memes, humor, and community can unite millions in seconds. Every failed promise, every setback, becomes another lesson, and another spark for the next uprising. A generation that won't be silenced. Even if the early victories in Nepal and Madagascar are complicated, something irreversible has begun. Young people have realized they don't have to wait for permission to demand change. They've learned how to mobilize without leaders, coordinate without parties, and challenge systems that once seemed untouchable. Their protests might look chaotic, they might end in uncertainty, but they've already redefined what political participation means in the digital age. The world's leaders should take note. This generation is not disengaged. They're organized, creative, and connected. And their revolutions, fueled by humor and frustration, are not going away. What happens next? As of October 2025, the movements in Nepal and Madagascar continue to influence others. Governments in Kenya, Morocco, and Peru are monitoring youth sentiment closely, aware that online outrage can now spill into the streets within hours. Protesters themselves remain cautious but determined. They know change won't happen overnight, but they also know they've already proven something powerful, that even a generation raised on screens can shape the real world. The rise of youth revolts shows one truth: Gen Z is rewriting the rules of history. They're connected by culture, not geography. They use humor as a weapon and technology as their stage. The results may not be perfect yet, but the message is clear: this generation will not be ignored. What do you think? Will these Gen Z uprisings bring lasting change or fade like past revolutions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.